Let's get into it. Wow. We are so hyped to be starting this book, particularly just because of what I said earlier, right? That most racial ideologies aren't necessarily not prevalent to today, but wow, is this not super prevalent to what we're living in today? I want to take a moment though to pull back and acknowledge that Alexis shared with us Phil Mendez, author of The Black Snowman, Gwendolyn Brooks, Phyllis Wheatley, and John Steptoe. Thank you, Alexis. So we were assigned to read chapters 1 through 3 to start us off, and it doesn't matter necessarily where you are in that, as long as maybe you've touched base. And if you haven't had an opportunity to touch base, don't worry, because we're going to do some group work together right now. Y'all know I love my group work. So I actually, on my work computer, have the book on my work. I'm like reading it from my work computer, and I wanted to read the first 2 to 2.5 pages of the introduction. So if you have the book in front of you and you want to pull out that introduction, you want to follow along, or if you want to hear the smooth, melodious vibrations that come out of me and nothing else, that's fine as well. But I'd like, I'm sorry, was someone laughing? You saying something?
No, I was laughing.
Better laugh at me, Yannick, and you better always laugh at me. Make me know I'm doing my job. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the introduction, talk a little bit about language, substitutive language. Let's define some terms like what is man, who is man, right, in this. And I'm only going to read the first 2 pages, but I just want to know what do folks think of the intro. And if you haven't had the chance to read the intro, here we go. I may entice you. So I still see folks flipping through. I don't want to start yet. I'm over here being a showman while folks get their books out. And it starts with a quote from Discourse on Colonialism. And the quote is, "I'm talking about millions of men whom they have knowingly instilled with fear and a complex of inferiority, whom they've infused with despair and trained to tremble, to kneel, and behave like flunkies." And I wonder why he chooses this quote. And maybe we could talk about it as we go in. Don't expect to see any explosion today. It's too early or too late. I'm not the bearer of absolute truths. No fundamental inspiration has flashed across my mind. I honestly think, however, it's time some things were said. Things I'm going to say, not shout. I've long ago given up shouting. Long ago. Why am I writing this book? Nobody asked me to, especially not those for whom it is intended. So, in all serenity, my answer is that there are too many idiots on this earth. And now that I've said it, I have to prove it. Striving for a new humanism, understanding mankind, our Black brothers. I believe in you, man. Racial prejudice, understanding and loving. I'm bombarded from all sides with hundreds of lines that try to foist themselves on me. A single line, however, would be enough. All it needs is one simple answer, and the Black question would lose all relevance. What does man want? What does the Black man want? Running the risk of angering my Black brothers, I shall say that a Black is not a man. There is a zone of non-being, an extraordinarily sterile and arid region, an incline stripped bare of every essential from which a genuine new departure can emerge. In most cases, the Black man cannot take advantage of this descent into a veritable hell. Man is not only the potential for self-consciousness or negation. If it be true that consciousness is transcendental, then we must also realize that this transcendence is obsessed with the issue of love and understanding. Man is a yes, resonating from cosmic harmonies, uprooted, dispersed, dazed, and doomed to watch as the truths he has elaborated vanish one by one. He must stop projecting his antinomy into the world. Blacks are men who are Black. In other words, owing to a series of affective disorders, they have settled into a universe from which we have to extricate them. I actually have to keep going, but I will stop there for now. What is his proclamation in the first 2 pages of the introduction? What is he trying to proclaim? Another way to look at this question is like, what is he saying? What is he about to do? What is he about to tell?
It feels like he's trying to shape manhood and what that means in the context of being a Black man. One of the things, and this is kind of a side, I'm reading it on a Kindle, and the use of the word Black sometimes is capitalized, sometimes it's not. And I wasn't sure if he was trying to send a deeper meaning around that. And again, that might be my Kindle, I don't know. But the idea that just because you are, that there's a difference between being Black and being a Black man in those times. And later on, he goes on to talk about what does it mean to be a Black Antilles, which is from that sort of island region, and what that means in like France, that being a Black man doesn't have the same value. That's how I read it, as just being a white man.
Yes, it's in the printed version as well, the way your Kindle's reading it. So those distinctions between identity are very true. And yeah, in the next couple of paragraphs, he goes on literally to name what you've said. So that's right.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I thought I had, I'm not sure about this, but I thought I had is he saying here that ascribing, like I hear when he says man, that he's talking about a human, and that ascribing Black to a human in the way the world is organized back then and now takes away from the humanity of that human because of what we do and how we relate to a man who is Black. Like the very ascribing of that color or the use of that color, that word, to designate who that person is a way in which the way we organize it in the world is a way in which we dehumanize that person. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about that, but it's what I think is being said here.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that was wrong, because I think ultimately he ends the introduction by saying like, this is actually about like exploring the relationship between Black and white, like the Black-white relationship, and we're going to explore what that is. So everything you've named is that, right? But in what he's named thus far. And I like what you said about, because in this time, of course, man is term for humanity, right? And all of that work that it's taken to even dismantle some of that language from then to now to be able to place it in the present day. So I appreciate it. Any other thoughts? Yes, please. Hello, Kevin.
I'm also reading this maybe very literally. Like one, I find Fanon kind of funny, especially when he just starts off saying, there's a lot of idiots in this world. It's very brash, and it's kind of just like, all right, kind of unexpected. But then he sets off by saying, then I actually have to like back that up. Like I have to own my words. And then immediately he says, what I want to do here is a new humanism. But in order to do that, that's going to require understanding mankind, dismantling racial prejudice. And I think really his target audience is Black people. But I think more specifically, you know, he's also obviously writing from the position of a Black man, but one particularly from Martinique.
Right. And it's for Black people. I like that you named that this is for Black people as well. I appreciate that. Obden, please.
Yeah, I guess the only things I wanted to add was like, I do like appreciate like in this opening of like, there is like this question of Black and white, and also this question of like categories of like, you know, what is a Black man and what is a man? And like on page 9, at least in my version, there's also like this description between that gulf of like I'll read it first, but like the Black man wants to be white and the white man slaves to reach a human level. So it's like, there is like this idea of humanity and like Blackness, and I guess Black man like exists outside or away from this humanity. So like, I think it's like, let's not blur this. There are different categories here, and like we have to acknowledge that before even like dealing with the problem. So like, it's almost like Black folk and Black men, I guess in this situation, are seen as inhuman in a certain way, or are seen as inhuman, and like we have to like start from there to begin with the situation. And then like the last thing I'll say is like, the reason why I like these categories is because like there's also like a deconstruction to it, and it makes me think of Patricia Hill Collins, who writes Black Feminist Thought, where like she cites, I think, Sojourner Truth, where like there's this description of like that poem or like that saying of "Ain't I a woman?" and like describes in society all these ways that like women are defined, but because she is a Black woman, she is like below all the niceties that are expected to happen towards a woman. So it's like this like, you know, what is this category or description of woman and man, and like look how we exist outside of it, and this is a problem.
Absolutely. And again, like that kind of reminds me of Anais's point too, to naming that like that term man in this time is in substitute for human, right? Like we would read this now and see it as human or see it as all encompassing. And so I really appreciate that. And I want to name too that he then, because even in that very part that you named in the parallel sort of page, in my, I don't know, I have a computer version of the book, so it's like the paragraphs are weird. But in a parallel page to that, he basically goes on to say, we are aiming at nothing less than to liberate the Black man, right? From two camps, a white one and a Black one. The idea that the Black man also has to liberate himself from this idea of whiteness, and then what does it mean to then operate in Blackness, I think is most prevalent, and we still talk about it today. It's why people are obsessed with a Will Smith slap. But I digress too far, but don't worry, we'll connect later. Mrs. Harris, I'll call you by your last name because you're the professor. You gotta unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be back. Something that I got from the introduction also was, and it brought me in circles and kind of drove me crazy, but because of the social and economic reality, or because race has an influence on the social and economic reality, Black people inherently have a desire to differentiate their experience from the white experience. But what I feel like Fanon is saying is that that's almost a self-imprisonment in alienating the Black experience from the white experience. One is ultimately alienating the Black experience from humanity and saying that we are having these experiences because we are inherently inferior. But I almost feel like that's not necessarily the only reason. I think that there's a social and economic reality of a lot of what Fanon is saying here that is not really explored, that kind of brought me in circles in all of the chapters when thinking about like buying into this idea of Blackness is almost buying into this idea of white supremacy. I get it. And in order to liberate ourselves, we need to get away from that and understand that Blackness is not an inferior identity. It's just an identity. And as man, it's our responsibility to liberate ourselves and understand ourselves individually, this idea of enlightenment, self fulfillment, self-meaning. But something that I struggle with again is this kind of esoteric philosophical point that he's trying to make against the realities of race as fundamentally influencing our experiences and the economic reality.
Totally hear that and definitely want to uphold and appraise. Something I like to do, y'all are new with me, but you're going to see the more we do this. I give gems and I ask you to give them too. So when I feel like someone says something really good, feel free to give some like verbal, oh, you did great, that was great, because we like to show love and praise love here. And before I continue the comment, it actually just reminded me something that Ron and I didn't mention, is that this is definitely, just because we're in it and we're literally talking about it in the book, this is an academic space. This is also a community space. This is a space to show up whole. This is also a party space. I know you wouldn't think so because we're reading books, but we are. This is a space for you to have your evening wine or your tea or whatever it is that also allows you to relax, eat, get through it. I just want to name that, like, in this new age of how we come together and we actually discuss ideology, let's also break apart the bourgeoisie idea of like, ooh, we're a book club. Like, no, we're here, we're whole, we're at book club. And Alexis, Alexis, I see you're next. What I want to name really quickly to Professor Harris's point is that esoteric sort of sentiment that you're like feeling and getting from reading this is also very much, we can look at pockets of Blackness in the 50s and name respectability politics and all of these other factors that allow Black folks in certain positions with platform, right? That isn't necessarily entertainment, to have to actually show up in this way to then dismantle. So I think there's tons of folks that we could look at from the time and name, and I'm talking about poets as well. I mean, I said Audrey, and not necessarily the 50s, right? She was probably born around them, but even later on during Audrey, there are some things that she writes that I'm like, oh, this is a little esoteric and not whole encompassing of like Black experience, Black issue, and all of the different factors that define even Western Blackness, right? Because we're here in the US talking about this. So I just really appreciate that. And I want to hone us in that a lot of what we're going to be reading is like in the 50s, you know? So how do we name what still feels true? Because also, Ms. Harris, to your point, we woke up this morning to a declared war on Black and brown women's bodies, or Black and brown femmes, or Black and brown folks with the ability to give birth, right? Like overturning Roe versus Wade. Like all of these things are relevant because whatever is happening then is also kind of still trickling now. So the esotericism hasn't necessarily gone away. I'm not saying that either. Okay, whoa, rant over. Alexis, talk to us.
Thank you. I mean, we needed all of that, so no worries. So I actually had an issue with the use of man to include everyone, particularly when the only time that a woman or a female presence was mentioned was in the context of sex, and it was very aggressive. And I only got through the introduction in the first chapter, and I just don't see myself in the conversation. And I do agree that it is a discourse on the definition of manhood, like was stated initially. And so that othering of femininity and that feminine energy and just women's place in manhood outside of having sex with women, if that is your flavor of the day, is not it. I just don't see. I'm not seeing. Nah. Yeah, it's not.
I love that you named that. I appreciate that. I wonder if other folks feel that way, that they want to jump in and say that. Y'all know, I mean, for those of you that know me, part of the reason why I was like, let's read this a little bit as a group is because automatically the first thing that stood out to me is the use of man. Again, I'm going to come back to my life guru, Anaisa's point about how we use, Anais is like, I'm your life guru. How in this term, man, as we explore, there are certain pockets of ideology, especially when we start talking about colonialism, right? And he gets into that in the first couple of chapters after chapter 2, where human can be traded or sort of exchanged with the idea of man. But to your point, these first couple of pages that we read aloud does feel like he's speaking to men and men only in a certain way that I also am a little uncomfortable with. And I'm like, oh, let me try to get through. So I'm just trying to affirm you and name that, like, I felt that way. And if others felt that way, I think that makes sense.
I think we also have to take into account, not making excuses, that this book was written in the 50s.
Yeah, that's
So,
what I said before.
You know,
Yeah,
it was kind of a different time.
right. And I think what's important when we come to this now in our current time in 2022 is to sort of be able to name. Because look, I'm looking at what Carol's saying, and then I'm thinking about Tehran's point. Let me just read Carol's point out loud, and I promise you it's going to connect. Carol wrote, he defines the challenges about identity psychologically, philosophically, and therefore hidden and seen at different times depending on awareness. We are just in a longer timeline of that awareness, right? We're like actually on this end of it. So it's important for us to name what feels uncomfortable, what doesn't feel right, because we're adding depth and emphasis sort of to the ideology in which we're already trying to explore, right? Because things could always be like added to. And there are certain things that can be left behind. And I think it'll be a great exploration on our part as a group to figure out, like, what do we take from this that is so prevalent and relevant to how we understand Blackness today? And what can we say, actually, that's not inclusive of like trans folks, women, so let's leave that away, right? I wanted to really quick read what Obden wrote, and then I'm coming, Diane, because you could just talk. Y'all don't have to raise your hand. You can cut me off, all that. But I just want to say that Obden wrote, he wrote it at 27, which I think about a lot. And Obden, I'm going to come to you after Diane, but I want you to talk about that because that's so real. Diane, please.
No, it's amazing how like you're talking about the awareness coming into us like later in life. Because he wrote that on 50s, and I came from Brazil, and race in Brazil, it's a mess.
Absolutely.
We definitely don't know where we stand. I'm a biracial kid. Was very complicated because here we do have like one, the bloodline rule, which, fits very well here. But in Brazil, it's a huge mix, and because of that mix, it's a mess. And not just causing that mess has the complex of inferiority from Brazilians living in other countries. It's huge. It's a big thing. Like even like the social class that is like the upper class, and even if they are white, they still carry the inferiority whenever they go to a European country or in a North American country. So it's very interesting how he also talks about the complex that it kind of follow race and men.
Absolutely. What do I add to that except brilliance? I'm giving you gems. If y'all want to give gems, you go there too. And thank you for the perspective around Brazil. Totally resonates. Alexis writes, women have always been human though. That's a fact. And we know, especially in the 50s, like language around liberation and women's, even the Young Lords and the Black Panthers didn't include women in their language until the late 70s, early 80s, or mid 70s, early 80s. So, you know how they do us, Alexis. Kevin says, I think it's also important that this is part of the results of his dissertation as well as first experiences in clinical settings. So I want to go really quick to, someone said he was 27. Obden, I think it was you. And Kevin, if you want to chime in or like add more, you can. But let's talk a little bit about that, right? Like these are sort of his first ramblings, if you will, his first remnants of like what he thinks is important to share around racial ideology. What do we think of him being 27 or this being sort of his first thing? Like what does that tell us or what does it imply? And maybe anybody can answer, but
yeah, I'll speak back on it. Like, I guess when I'm thinking about him writing this at 27, it was just like, I'm old enough to now realize that 27 is really young to write something. And I don't want to take away from what is like a very prescient like text, and obviously we're talking about it right now. But I think I used to, and this thing, I have this tendency to like look at something and like, because it's such an important text, like not challenge it or critique it, but I'm like, I would definitely critique anyone who's 27. And I think what's better to say is that like, another thing to pull is that like, there's a particular limitations to his understanding. Like he says it himself, like I undertake to prepare the world that will come later. I belong irreducibly to my time, right? Like there are things that he's able to observe and give his interpretations to, and there are things that he's limited to with like the identities that he has as a Black man living in the 1950s, being 27. So like, I appreciate like you mentioning that there is going to be a very big importance of interjecting a lot of blind sides that he has when he's like trying to give descriptions of the society that he's dealing with. And so those are the things like, it's just like, if anything, he is like encouraging critique of this work to like build upon it further.
Right. Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's what almost every sort of like well-respected Black storyteller / ideologist or someone who has strong ideology is able to show us. And I always go to this example because we read their stuff last year, but even in the same room and during the same time writing about very similar notions on opposite sides of similar identities, right? Not identifying as cishet. Audre Lorde and Jimmy often looked at each other, James Baldwin, and were like, you don't see me. Nah, you don't see me. No, trust me, you don't see me, right? And having to be in that discourse. So like, let's also engage, just to reiterate the point, let's also engage with this text in this way. And I'm the one, like if you have smoke or something angers you, or if you feel very strongly, like this is the space that we can hold that in with love and make sure that by 8:30, you're feeling good and you're able to move forward. Look, Anais is attesting to it. She's like, yes, this is true, you know? So please bring your common sense and bring your sense of like, okay, this was written in the 50s, but also bring the smoke. Like we're here for all of it.
No, you know, and that's just a joke, but I do agree. Like, I do wonder why he's so concerned with Black women liking white men. Like, I think he has like a whole chapter, like there's going to be a chapter that's coming with that. And I'm just like, I mean, I don't know, like, what is it to you? Like, I don't know, like.
And vice versa, Black men liking white women.
Yeah, like, yeah.
Rachel, I didn't even know you were here and I got so hypey. Oh my. Okay.
I only read the introduction in chapter 1, so I don't really want to talk too much because I don't.
Yeah, but since when? Okay, but y'all old timers should already know. Like, don't do that. Like, just you better come in here. I just want to come to the chat real quick and name that. Carol asked, how would this be different if you changed the title to Black Masks, White Skin? Would it be? Maybe that's very poetic and we have to like get a little bit more into it. Maybe it's a question to ask a little bit deeper and when we're a little bit deeper, but I like this question. I'm reading it aloud because I would like this question to remain. Like, why do you think he chose it in this way? Especially if he's saying that like Black people are trying to, or Black men is what he's saying, are trying to emulate or be in some sort of reflection of white men or whiteness, right? He says Black man wants to be the white man. So I wonder how that would be different. Professor Harris, go for it.
To add to his point on age, I think it reveals, first and foremost, his brilliance, like this idea that racism is not only something that is external to us, but it's almost an internal prison. We adopt a lot of these concepts of inferiority, as someone noted earlier, like depending on our levels of awareness. But I think it also reveals his naivete. Like at the end of the 3rd chapter, he says, okay, the alternative to all of this is a restructuring of the world. And many people might argue that that restructuring of the world has not happened many years later. So I think that his argument is brilliant. And I think I'm going back to my original point earlier. Like, I think, what's the alternative? And I don't know if there's an answer to that. And I don't know if the point of the book is to present an answer to that, but it was something that that stood out to me.
Right. And I see Pamela had named, but it still needs to be restructured. We can think of it as an alternative. We could think of it as like a reformation. We could think of it as a reparation. There are so many different avenues in which one can explore what is the alternative to like current Black identity in the United States. And I think I would also argue that we're in that. We're constantly in that conversation when we talk about acknowledging Black trans folks, when we talk about Black children, when we talk about autonomy, and when we talk about like ownership, when we talk about land, when we talk about access to clean water, when we talk about Michigan, Flint, right? Like all of these are nuances, or if not the main point of that. So I think that's a great thing to bring up. Diane says, I think because, like it was said in the beginning, it was mostly written to the Black community because of the need to survive, because the need of survival in this community can cause blindness of the cause and of the struggle. Certainly, and I would agree, especially if we're talking about the 50s and you think about what does it take for the restructuring of like a Black middle class, right? Or a Black social class even, like let's just start there. And how are folks navigating a Western United States identity in a sense of freedom, right? Post-enslavement. So all of these things are really, really important to keep in mind. And I'm giving everybody gems at this point. So I don't even know where to go. Are there any other resounding thoughts, ideas, questions? Any words? You could take some time now to flip through the book if you'd like. We're here for a while, baby. Anything that stands out?
This is Alexis again. I actually think that the part where he said that the fact that this one was introduction page. Oh, I hate Roman numerals. Is that 16?
Okay.
Yeah.
16. We'll read it a little too, and then we could guess.
Yeah, he says, many Blacks will not recognize themselves in the following pages, likewise many whites, but the fact that I feel alien to the world of the schizophrenic or of the sexually impotent in no way diminishes their reality. So for me, like, I'm just wondering, like, do people have to exist for him to acknowledge their reality? Like, it was just weird to me. Like, I still was thinking about women and that whole thing, like their invisibility and him not acknowledging folks unless there's an interaction with them. And for me, that made me feel like that's still diminishing somebody's reality of their humanity. Like, and he's not seeing that hole in his conversation. But as I said, I don't think this book is meant for women per se. I think it's to humanize Black men.
I really appreciate it. Can you read that again?
I was just going to add that felt really patriarchal.
Yeah, can you read that part again? Where's it at? There, I'm like, what?
It's in, what is that? It's page 16.
Of the intro?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's why I'm bugging. Okay.
It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
5th paragraph, many Blacks.
I found it, yep.
A lot of the early chapters in the intro sort of in my mind connected me to the book that we read with Beyond Words Book Club, The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, and how patriarchy, no matter how hard we try, is so ingrained in this society that, you know, unless you take extraordinary measures to change it, you're just going to perpetuate it. And it feels like Frantz Fanon, is not he's challenging the place for Black people in society, but it doesn't feel, again, early on, like he's concerned with women, Black women within the society.
Not even so much about Black women in the society, but just what is a man without a woman? Or what is Blackness without whiteness, and vice versa? And I think like that is the concern that I have when it comes to conversations about with and about Black men, about their manhood. Who are you without a Black woman to define your humanity or your existence? And if we can't have that conversation there, then that's part of the problem. So that's just me. I'm gonna step back though.
You better step up. You better step up.
No, I agree, Alexis. Right. I want to hear more of your thoughts. Actually.
Yeah, you better step up. Kevin, was I right? Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I have two things that I want to say actually.
Go for
When
it.
I was reading this, I actually interpreted like going from the line, right, the savage will not be included here, savage in parentheses. So then certain elements have not yet had enough impact on him. That's interesting. That's like a historical joke, I think. But we believe the juxtaposition of Black and white races has resulted in a massive psycho-existential complex. By analyzing it, we aim to destroy it. And then going back to many Blacks will not recognize themselves. And then he goes back to talking about like a psychological condition. The fact that I feel alien to the world of the schizophrenic or the sexually impotent in no way diminishes their reality. So like he's referring to psychology back like earlier and again throughout. But on top of that, like that line itself, where he says, the fact that I feel alien in no way diminishes their reality. It's like, it doesn't matter who I am and whether or not I acknowledge that these people exist, they still exist. And they have their own world, and or the fact or the sense that the material world is still going to have different impacts on them than it does for me, whether or not I see it or acknowledge it. So in a way, it's kind of like, I don't know, I see it kind of like in both ways, a little like cold indifference if you're unaware of it, but at the same time, kind of like being aware of your subjective realities, even though you live in the same world.
Yes, I too feel that line about feeling alien to the world of schizophrenic or sexually impotent, while inappropriate at best, for sure, right? Given that we're in a different time frame and maybe not how we would other people, definitely him trying to say that he is not above them or he is not more important, nor are they less important. So I think that was like a funny patriarchal way, patriarchal joke, however you want to put it, right? But that was just like him trying to be like funny and sarcastic and naming that like this, my truth about this doesn't change the perspectives or the truths of other folks in this. And yes, it feels jarring because he's naming schizophrenia and he's naming sexually impotent, two things that are like so far from who he could be, right? Which is how I read that. Like, so it's him, it reminds me of when I'm like, oh, I'm 100 years old, and y'all start laughing at me because you're like, no, you're not. It's just like this maybe overcompensating sort of way of trying to like acknowledge who they are and the irony of writing all of this and having this sort of commentary. So like, is it like the funniest thing to some people? No, but you know, I don't necessarily see it as him othering in an aggressive way, or maybe in a passive way. Shamika, that hand is perpetually up, so I can't, is up? I'm calling on you. Okay, no, I don't want to miss you. Okay.
It's Shemeka.
Shemeka.
Yeah.
That's true, because it's 2 C's. Shemeka. Got it. I know how to read. Okay. So I love what y'all are giving me. It's amazing. He also says this book is a clinical study, right? Which I think is really, really, really important, because those are sort of the things that we also, not many people will write an entire ideology and proclaim that like it's subject to change depending on the variable, right? Like most people write something and it's like, no, this is the word, this is it. So maybe it's not as black and white. Oh, you like the irony there? It's not as black and white as we may be taking in at this moment. Are there any other thoughts around patriarchy? I also had, this is a side note, and I'm going to read Mercy what you just said because this looks great. But someone who's not able to join us tonight, she messaged me and she was telling me how she really wants to join. And like in our quips, our back and forth, and she's like a very funny person, very open. She was just like, this patriarchy doesn't even belong to me, which I was like, whoa, because for some people that may resonate and that may be true. But to our earlier point, patriarchy is deeply embedded in all of our systems and how we navigate each other. So to negate its existence in you or around you may be sort of like when white people say, I don't see color, right? And you're like, whoa, what do you mean? I'm very Black and I'm right here, right? So it's sort of that, it's that understanding. And I wonder how folks think of that or speak to that. Mercy says, speaking hyperbolic to make a point. Boom, that's exactly what was going on there. While dismissing the reality of those conditions he makes references to because of ignorance of them. Yeah, that's literally it, Mercy, because of his ignorance. And again, his want or need to make this grander point and show that even though I don't relate to them, I understand that I'm not better. And that's what I'm going to try to explain to white people and to Black people. You're right. It's like sort of like that notion. Let's click the Wikipedia page, shall we? Even better, Ron, am I co-hosting this session? Can I share my screen? Now I can probably. I'm gonna share my screen. I'm gonna share my screen. And we're gonna read this together. We're just gonna skim through it. We don't have to read all of it. It's okay if you look at my tabs. I watch a lot of TV. Don't worry about it. Okay. So let's scroll through this a little bit. Oh, July 20th. Anybody know what zodiac sign that is? Let's really get into the man. Like, what is that?
Cancer.
Ow! Emotional. Okay, shout out to Cancer. My dad's a Cancer. Shout out to y'all if your Cancer's in the room. He was French West Indian, psychiatrist, political philosopher from the French colony of Martinique. Works have become influential in the fields of post-colonial studies. We know this, critical theory, Marxism. As well as being as intellectual, Fanon was a political radical, a Pan-Africanist, and a Marxist humanist concerned with the psychopathology of colonization and the human, social, and cultural consequences of decolonization. Let's scroll a little bit more down to the book we're reading. Oh, look at this. If you don't have time to read the book, you can just come here and see where we at. You like that trick, right? See where we at and come on in.
I wonder, do they mention his religion?
In here, let me see.
I just realized that his first name is Ibrahim.
Mm-hmm.
And he did spend a lot of time in Northern Africa. Maybe
so do you think
converted? Because I can't imagine that he would, this is definitely possible, but he would be Muslim coming out of the French Caribbean, but anything's possible.
It doesn't say.
But that might shape his views on women if he were.
Why, Ron? Keep going. Keep going with that thought.
I mean, only because
what happened?
He was Catholic.
He was Catholic.
Wait, hold on. Let me back up. Hold on.
It'd be interesting to extend Fanon's theory to gender. Can it be said that patriarchy creates an inferiority complex for women? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't even know if Fanon's necessary. I don't even know if that theory is necessary to even. I wonder if using that theory would be patriarchal, like in order to dead, right? Like in order to prove it, you know? Sorry, someone else was saying something. Alexis.
I apologize. I think he was agnostic or atheist.
Agnostic or atheist. I mean, it said his father was a descendant from enslaved folks and also was enslaved for a little bit. And then it said his mother was I just read it right now. It says his mother was a shopkeeper. She was half white, half Afro-Martinician. His father was a customs agent. Yeah, maybe perhaps they weren't religious. Maybe it's just patriarchy.
I thought he was raised Catholic or some point. I read, seen that someplace.
Next time, if someone can come back with that information.
I'm just gonna, sorry to cut in. I'm just gonna assume that because Martinique was a French colony, it's probably just Catholic. I mean, the Dominican Republic, even Haiti, nominally Catholic, even if like traditionally, I think it's just a colonial thing.
Right.
I agree with you, Kevin. I think he was, if I believe, I must have read somewhere that he was Catholic. That doesn't mean he practiced Catholicism growing up. That could, like, I was raised Catholic too, but that's not what I really do. So, but definitely Catholic, as a result of being colony of France. Yeah, I think that's right.
Exactly. That was going to be my point, Yannick. To your point, Kevin, while that may be historically prevalent, of course, for those lands, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what he's practicing or exploring in his adulthood, especially when regarding and creating some of these ideologies. And I think it's interesting to note whether he maintained that sense of Catholicism, but then is over here trying to tell people to liberate themselves, right? Because then that's like even to maybe the point that Ron was leading to, I don't know, but even that is an internal sort of conflict, which it wouldn't be the first person we've read that's done that. And we've questioned as a group, like, but are you praying to white Jesus? Because if you are, what are we talking about here? You know, like, why are we reading this? Diane with the research said Fanon regarded Catholicism as the state religion of France, which at the time was intimately intertwined with the French assimilationist policies in the colonial context, unlike Islam in the form of Sufism, which he felt was innately anti-colonial in character. So look at that. That's absolutely, he literally found, he was like, I'm going to root myself in non-colonial Blackness, and like, I'll identify in that way. My church, I live near a church, so you just hear that. Don't worry about that. No one's coming to get me. Sorry, I'm also, the hardest thing about book club is taking in the brilliance as I'm trying to facilitate and spit it out. I just really appreciate what folks are naming tonight, because I think it makes sense too from a point of privilege. We have to understand that most of our authors are in a space of privilege, regardless of their identity, right? Regardless of how they fall into line. It's privilege to be able to like enter academic space. It's privilege to be able to create platform. And particularly if you're writing a book back then, platform has to be extended to you in a certain way, right? We don't have many books even that like exist from Black printing shops from back then. So understanding that it's what I think about every Black academic that's like committed to tenure and all those things. It's like, trust me, there's an internal, I think, conversation that's constantly happening, right? Around self-identity and the identity that's imposed. How do we see ourselves and how do we fit that into what society needs us to be? And the higher platform you have, or the more access you have, particularly Black people and words, right? Literally, they didn't even want Black folks to read at one point in US history. Black people and words, it creates an avenue of privilege that I think then gets tricky. I also want to take a quick note and ask you to also intake this book sort of as if you were intaking a hip hop album. It would be my way of naming it. Think of like a young Nas, or even like a mid-age Jay, right? Or one of these young kids now, who I won't name because, I mean, don't worry about it, right? And think about how that young man's understanding of the world and his observations, you know, we have albums that we, in our culture, that we consider iconic and classic, and it's in very similar notions and lines. And if we could sit and listen to Nas's Illmatic and still find ourselves and hear ourselves and see ourselves in the way he paints a narrative, I think it's important to take that sort of approach when reading this book. Because there are many terms that don't include many of us in this group, right? But it doesn't mean that it's not necessarily not for us. He just may not have had that intent. I want to name that Diane shared that article, so please make sure you get it. Frantz Fanon's Ambivalence Toward Religion. maybe it's something we could read next time. Yeah, thank you, Diane. You get mad love. Thank you for sharing that. I kind of want to move on to another thought, but first I want to make sure, is there anything else? Ooh, love this. This reminds me of an article that I recently read about Malcolm X, in which it addresses Malcolm's treatment of women. Absolutely. Most of our Black leaders, I mean, King was a womanizer, but Tarisha, please feel free to unmute yourself and talk more. If you want to. If you don't want to, that's fine. Here, Tarshia.
Talk louder.
Maybe it's the headphone, yeah.
I can't hear her.
Yeah, she's gonna fix
Can you hear me now?
Ooh, beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you, Tarshia.
It's Tarshia. Thank you. It was by Farah Griffin. I forget her middle name. Farah J. Griffin. Jasmine. I don't know, but she's a professor at one of the New York colleges. But she addressed the idea of Malcolm X and how Black feminists were, very supportive of him, quoting him oftentimes, and kind of disregarding his earlier stance on Black women in their in their role of in the movement, but also. And she looks at an archival piece where it's a letter that he writes to his cousin, where he says he has to rectify what he's done, which was to tell Black men in the Nation of Islam to spit on Black women and just to regard them as being too demanding. So I think with Fanon in this case, he seems to lump Black people together, and though he in other cases he's saying Black men, and then Black men Black women are addressed in those chapters in relation to their sexuality with white men. But I kind of feel like he being this young man, he had some of these aspects of his personality that were not dealt with in his youth. He did die young and didn't have a chance to go back and have that redemption, like Malcolm X had this experience that, changed him or whatever, which Fanon also talks about. But I think it's interesting because my prickles went up, but at the same time, I just kind of had to suspend that to get the message that he was trying to convey about Blackness. I feel like we're always doing that, but
it is what Black women always do. That's why I say to take this like a hip hop album, because historically, every Black woman that is a connoisseur of hip hop knows that there are certain things that are not going to be pleasing to how we see ourselves, and still have to take that art in historically, right? So again, I really, really appreciate that perspective. Someone had their hand up. Oh, and I found the article "Ironies of the Saint," written by.
I have seen. I don't remember exactly which page it was, but he was saying that basically the man stopped growing when he was like 20, and then he 29, and then he only goes back when he's 49. So it's just kind of took me to what like Tarsha said, that he didn't have the chance to have the redemption, but it's almost like he acknowledged that that's like later on someone could grow and like learn more, because they kind of had to stop to survive or deal with life in this situation,
Absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, I think also to Tashia's point, I'm trying to remember, I think we read it as a group. Maybe I read it on my own. There's a woman who, I think it's a poet, but I can't remember, that she wrote the whole like, love me the way you love your master, like pleading with Black men to love me and see me and appease me, appeal to me, fake the funk for me the way you would for your white boss at home, right? That's what the whole thing, this is a very famous, thank you.
Nikki Giovanni, yeah.
Trying to remember, baby. Trying to remember. It's Nikki talking to Jimmy, right? I mean, it's Nikki, yeah, okay. And she says sort of this notion of like, appeal to me, appease me. Do what you got to do to make me feel good. Save, don't bring me your scraps of whatever they've taken from you during the day. And that's what I'm expected to love, curate, you know, cherish, protect, right? Because especially in a Black woman identity, you're supposed to protect Black men and what that is. So all of these things are, I get very passionate. If this is your first time here, you know, I literally fill up when y'all say amazing things. But don't Black men love / hate white men too? Yes. So what Nikki Giovanni is naming, I don't know if you're familiar with the piece, Alexis, but in this little thing, boom, thank you, Ron, pull it up. Oh yes, because we had to read this for our last Jimmy conversation. But basically, long story short, she's saying, and I'm gonna mess it up, so please make sure you watch it. But she's like, you know, the Black man goes to work every day, comes home and brings me your problems, your frustration, your anger, you bring me all of the ways that you've been mistreated and disregarded at work by your white boss. And then you bring me all that shitty, nasty, fucked up energy. And now I have to love you unconditionally. The job is to protect you, curate you, hold you, emphasize you unconditionally, while you bring me the results of like what white patriarchy gives you all day. So do me a favor, the way you smile and you fake it for your boss and you bring him an apple in the morning and you're like, here you go, boss. And you talk to him, do that with me. I'm paraphrasing, I'm being so Bronx about it. She didn't say it like this, but she's like, do that shit with me. Bring that energy to me. Love me the way you love him, even if it's not real, because I'll take that over what you're giving me, over your actual truth in this moment. And it's a very harsh rejection, sort of, that the Black man has to like understand and face in that moment. The proverbial Black man, not necessarily Jimmy, but maybe, right? Any Black man who's reading it, any man in general, probably is like, oh shit. So that's what that conversation is. So to your question or point, yes. Yes, that's a yes. Please make sure you click that conversation. Take a moment now, pull it to another tab so you can look at it when you're, eating dinner or whatever you do at 8:30 on Tuesday after I let you go. I always wonder what y'all do when I let you go. Let's make sure, because we have 15 minutes left, I want to talk about what we have to read next, our next couple of chapters, and I'm going to scroll up. Here we go. So our schedule for next Tuesday, which is the 10th, the expectation is that we read through chapters 4 and 5. And if you have a physical manual book, that's pages 64 through 119. If you have a Kindle, that also may be, I don't know. I have no idea what the differences are, but I know if you have a physical book, those are the pages. And I want to take this moment to remind folks, please share this time with your friends. Let them know if they have nothing to do, they want to come by, check us out. We are always in conversation Tuesday evenings. Okay, now that we got that out the way. Can we talk about chapter 3 for a moment? Did anyone get to chapter 3? Yeah. Any thoughts? Because it's, in my opinion, in chapter 3, he actually starts to be, I get a little bit more interested once I get past, all my own obstructions and things that make me uncomfortable. Chapter 3 is actually when he actually starts to speak to me. And if you haven't had a chance, that's fine. I'm bringing it to your attention now. Also, Ron reposted what I just verbally went over in case you didn't catch that and you need to see it again. But take a moment and let's go through chapter 3 if you want to, or like read through it. If someone did read chapter 3, can you tell me sort of what your thoughts were? Can you paraphrase a little bit about what Fanon's trying to say?
All right, so I think something that's at the heart of this chapter and a recurring theme throughout Fanon's work is the other not being totally separate from you, due to the fact that you create your sense of self and place in the world your identity, not just with what you are, but also what you are not. And I think he kind of extends that to relations between Black men and white women, and why a Black man would specifically want that. What are the psychological dynamics behind desiring a white woman? What does that mean materially, socially, historically, legally, psychologically? And it's also, really pertinent because his wife was white.
I was like, if Kevin says this part and doesn't say that other part, woo, thank you, Kevin. Yes, right. Also, I'm kind of like, damn, why'd I leave this part for the end? I'm gonna have, this is not like the best way to leave, but it's important to know, again, also, it may be more resonant to hear what he's saying because he does have a white wife, right? And what does that look, what does that mean for him? Any thoughts around that? I also want to said, but salud, Anais.
I also think like his mom is half white too, right? So
Yes.
it might have like a longer because of his mom being half white, that might have, you know, I think like it's a very complicated topic for me, instance, especially coming from Brazil. My dad is a Black man and my mom is a white woman, which was very hard because him as a Black man, he really wasn't that aware of race, to be very honest. He himself was like surviving the world, surviving poverty, and that race wasn't some topic that he could just stand up and think about it. And because he married a white woman, race wasn't something that was taught to the kids. So like, I feel like a lot of, like, just like Kevin said, I feel like it's almost like navigating like who you are. You know, it's like exactly what he said. It's just like, I can't put it into words.
No, yeah, navigating who you are. I think you got it.
I think it's like navigating who you are and linking that to with who you have.
Yes.
You know, I think it's like mostly that, like he grew, like the way he grew up, it was like very upsetting too, because he was like with a single mom, not having a dad. You know, I think like seeing what happened to his mom, you know, and not wanting the same outcome. I don't know if it was like some, like the trauma bringing back into how he ended up.
Totally. I see what you mean. Like maybe making decisions like, oh, like some fucked up version of, I won't even repeat this if I just get a white. Like we don't know, but yes, to your point, those things are totally possible. And I think he even kind of touches on why that may be possible as he uses his own examples of his wife.
Yeah, because I was wondering, it was like, I'm just reading it, I just started, but he says, by loving me, she proves to me that I am worthy of a white love. I am loved like a white man. I am a white man. I don't know, that was just like very like, whoa. Is that what, I mean, I don't know. I don't, you know, I don't think all interracial relationships, like that's the reason. I mean, I'm maybe some of it could be, but I don't think
maybe something like unconscious, you know.
Maybe, but I mean,
I feel like in Brazil, like we have a lot of colorism, and most of like race things is very like under, like it's not speak, so it's everything very unconscious. Like my dad didn't know anything about his race, but it's still like colorism is a big thing. We don't have like it's just two race, Black and white, and then there we use mulatto on papers. I'm not considered Black. I'm not white. I'm mulatto. But like mulatto is not a race. So it's like you really don't have, like you don't stand right here and you don't stand right there. And it doesn't matter if your dad is Black.
Right.
Because your color, it's not like, it's not similar, it's not the same, you know. It's so like, I feel like colorism has a lot to do with that. And unconsciously, whiter you go, you're better.
Absolutely. Subconsciously, you're like, okay, that's how it moves. And thank you for naming, because I think what you're also naming here is the historical erasure of Blackness in Brazil. So while her father definitely, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, so stop me, but I think what you're naming is like your father's navigating obviously in a Black identity, in a Black life, but because Blackness is, there's such an erasure of Blackness, he doesn't get to like be in that verbally. Instead, he has to just survive the other isms in which, right, without this conversation. And I think a couple of months ago, or I don't even know, the timeline's a little weird because of the pandemic, but we did read a book from a Brazilian author regarding women, and that book was centered on like queer women and the love around queer women. And I think we spoke with the author a little bit about like what is that erasure of Blackness in Brazil and how does that play out? So I just want to name that you're affirming things that we've learned as a group I appreciate that. I see Josh with your hand up, Alexis with your hand up. I want to say that what we're naming here is also, Pamela said, I think Fanon touches on the issues of class, and when he talks about the attitudes Martiniquans bring back home after being educated in France. And a lot of that attitude or that mind frame is in relationship to whiteness, right? That's why, like, those, what does that actually look like? So when he's saying she loves me like a white man, it's sort of, again, in this idea of like, well, what does that look like socioeconomically? What does that look like in regard to language, the language that he has access to, right? Like, all of those things are blending in when he's saying that. I want Josh and Alexis to go, and then I'll be able to read whatever's. Thank you, Ron. It was Natalia Borges Poleso. It was her book that we wrote. Joshua, please feel free. Oh, take your time.
Yeah, sorry, skip me. Have you heard?
Okay, yeah, you'll be back. Alexis, I see you want to speak. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. There's a line on page 8 in the introduction where he says the Black man wants to be white and the white man is desperately trying to achieve the rank of man. Like, it's saying that, like, it's an ascension, and like that kind of hurt my feelings, but I understand what he was saying, because there are so many aspects, like so many moments where we say, yo, white people can just do all kinds of stuff. And it's not necessarily because white people can do all kinds of stuff, but Black people kind of, or people of color, tend to stop and be like, hold on a second. Because we're seen as Black first, not as people. And so because white people are seen in their humanity, or that they exist outside of their color or their their socioeconomic status is an issue, right? But it's like, but you're still white though, right? And so now they're ascending in terms of manhood, but then, or like of their humanity, to a level outside of just being like this thing or like this being. Now you're doing more, but Black people have to first be human.
Right, but I want to name for you, but I think what you read aloud, what he's actually saying is that white people create humanity. It's not that they've ascended past it and that Black people, is that however high the totem pole goes is white people naming, okay, and now you got to be this. Okay, and now actually to be utmost human is, I'm putting my camera up to see you. Yeah. Utmost human is this. Like, white people have the capacity and the power, have had historically the capacity and the power, particularly in this time that he's writing this, to define humanity itself. They get to ascend that definition, right? And then Black men are trying to understand what that is via the white man's definition. So you're completely right, but I just want to clarify that main point. It's not even that they're going past humanity, is that white people tell us what humanity is and the rest of us fall in line. Particularly
and then the freedom of it, right? Like, and then the freedom of it. And that's what I think, like, I want to be triggered by what he said, but at the same time, I'm like, he's saying to us, like, my white wife allows me to be human and then free when I'm with her. And like that, I want to hear the, but she wants me to be white, or she loves me like a white person, so she sees me as human. But I think that it's really just saying, like, I can be free with this woman, and I appreciate that freedom that I wouldn't have someplace else.
Right. And simultaneously, as humans, as we like to do, and I'm coming to you now, Joshua, simultaneously as humans, as we like to do, we can appreciate someone's truth and still be triggered. I haven't met you necessarily, Alexis, but I assume that you identify as a Black person. And
yes, I'm a Black
woman. There we go. So I assume that within that Black identity, it makes a lot of sense to me if that triggers you, because I'm triggered, you know, like, and I understand that, like, it's like wanting to give him the benefit of the doubt, but also understanding that, like, oh, brother, this ain't even the tip of it. You know what I mean? And like, you're about to embark on an entire ideology based on this sentiment. I understand wanting to read it, but actually not having the time for it, even if it's a critique or even if it's his real feeling, whether it's rhetorical or not. Because that's the thing about Black women. We're often told, well, you know, we're, because I'm speaking to what Pamela is writing. We're often told, whether it's rhetorical or whether it's a critique or whether it's consciousness, hold it. Just hold it. And like, no, maybe not. Maybe we don't have to. Maybe not here with me. You know what I'm saying? And that's not just for Alexis, that's everybody, whether you're Black or not. Love ya. Joshua, talk to us. What would you like to share?
Sorry, I had to go because my little
Hi,
guy
little babes.
All right. So first, thanks. This is my first one, so thanks for letting me into this space. I've been finding this whole conversation interesting because I've read this book a bunch of times and just a lot of Fanon, like an amateur Fanon scholar, you know. But I found the conversation interesting because I've always read Fanon through a Marxist lens, and so hearing everyone speak about gender and race issues that are prevalent in the book and his argument in a way that I'm sort of not used to framing it is really interesting. Because I think, this is my opinion, I think he's trying to sort of make this like a proto-Marxist argument, you know, like, thank you. You know, like he was quoted for saying he stretches, like he was fine with stretching Marxian ideas and Marxist critique. So I just wanted to make a comment on that because I think that's the angle he's taking. That's how I've always read it.
Totally.
Not that he's excluding anyone, or rather, I guess I'll say this: his exclusion of specific peoples isn't because he's unaware of them. I think it's because he's trying to make it fit into a bigger Marxist framework. So I'm glad that I got to hear what everyone else had to say because, you know, I step away from those sides of analysis when I read Fanon, or I guess I've stepped away from those analyses. So
no, I appreciate that. That's really, and I think it's similar to what Pamela's naming. A lot of folks have actually reiterated what you're naming tonight in his like broader lens of critique as opposed to absolute definitive truths. And what I'm gonna reiterate always is that in this deeply, deeply, deeply community space, right? Because again, I really want to deconstruct and dismantle what it means to have an academic book club and what sort of ideologies are we bringing to our experiences when we talk about how people are supposed to take in reading. Because at the end of the day, we're all middle class, haha. We're all working class people. If you middle class, you shouldn't be here. Go something fun. We're all working class people. We're all working
school
class
teacher.
Yeah, everyone's a school teacher, right? Like we're all working class people living in a really expensive time who have been blessed and privileged enough to like make it this far in a pandemic. And maybe not all of us have everyone who we'd like to have with us, right? Like we're all in a really particular fragile time. And I think it's important when we come together for any book, whether it's a grand narrative or it's something like this, which is deep rooted in ideology, that we dismantle how things are traditionally taken. Because I want to reiterate that Fanon, Marxism, anything, any sort of like ism or, you know, John Locke, right? You think of any sort of enlightenment, any sort of idealism is always rooted in a space of privilege, period, regardless of identity. I'm talking about from Audrey to Frantz, okay? It's always going to be rooted in a space of privilege, especially in academia, especially in non-white body. It's the deepest of privilege. And we get to dismantle that. We get to honor that and say that's okay. But also that's not how like the 9-to-5ers live. And I want us to be able to bring all those things. Pamela says, I found it sometimes confusing if he was referencing characters in novels set in Martinique. Yeah, I wonder that too. I actually have to go back and do that research and be like, is this a show or not a show, obviously, but is this like a poet or someone that I don't know? Alexis, your hand is up. Oh.
No, I never put it down. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay. Anybody talk, whoever was talking.
That was me. This is Yannick. I was thinking, I know when I think of Frantz Fanon, I always think the major thing stays with me is that he talks about language and culture, how that's, you know, and I'm thinking, I grew up in a Haitian family. I was born here, Haitian American, would say, and the whole thing with language is such a big thing, and how powerful that language is to divide people, to make difference in social class. But I was going to say what Pam just said, that he talks about his life in Martinique, just like the other woman just spoke about Brazil, or I would talk about being Haitian. But he does say it on page 9, in that second paragraph, he says, We recall once again that our findings are valid for the French Antilles. We are well aware, however, that the same behavior can be found in any race subjected to colonization. So I think he's talking about his home base, what he's used to, what he comes from, but as a foundation to speak, but he talks there about colonization. That's just anyone who's exposed to that has the same issues, or, you know, whether it's someone that's from Africa, from the Caribbean, whatever, so.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I know it's 8:31. I don't want to take up any more time. My last thought that I want to part with you is that I really, really enjoyed this session today. Thank you so much for joining. I hope other folks enjoyed too. I hope you return next week. As I said, I've shared the references for before. And last, oh, gang, gang, boop, boop. The only other thing I want to name is that, again, it is of my firm belief and opinion, and because I am facilitating these sessions, you'll feel that sentiment. But you know, I'm here for you to challenge me every day. Ultimately, Marxism or Fanon or Audre Lorde or Malcolm or, you know, Martin, that is not, these foundations and these ideologies of the way people navigate race and story is not necessarily the root of revolution. The root of revolution is how us, the working class, navigate, expose, and I don't want to curse in front of the baby, but ultimately obliterate that shit, because our own freedom is dependent on it. Again, as we wake up to a day where they have overturned Roe versus Wade, I'm not letting that go. So I want you to bring your full self into it, not just perhaps the academic lens or something else in which you may have engaged in the work before.